Thank you very much. I think I'm just continuing Katie's talk. She talked about onions. I'm going to talk about figs. Sorry about the bright light, but that was in the slides before I actually switched them to a dark theme. I'm going to talk about figs and clocks. That's me. For those that can't see me personally, that's what I look like, almost. What do? I do run an agency. So if you have problems with time-related stuff, feel free to drop me a line. I'm working on a calendaring software called TeamUp, which means I do have some experience in date time things and clock things. I co-organize a user group. I'm an open source contributor, a time nerd. If you find a rabbit hole that's interesting, I'm happily digging into that. But that's not what I'm here today. Today I'm here to talk about a clock interface. An interface, so kind of a connection between your domain layers that Katie was talking about earlier. Why am I talking to you about clock interfaces? Or other question, who of you has ever used a clock interface already? So what are you doing here? I'm happy that you're here because otherwise the room would be even emptier. That's fine. For me, the reason why I'm standing here is actually this email. A few years back, I was in hospital for quite a while and had nothing to do. So I, of course, kept a watch on different mailing lists that I'm on. One of them was the PHP Fig mailing list, and that email just triggered me. I come to that in a few minutes. But the whole thing that I'm going to talk about is about actually best practices. And that was what this email actually triggered, like we are missing something there in the PHP community. Because the main problem that very often arises is when you're writing code, you write tests. At least I hope you write tests. And that's all fine and good until you come to a point where you have to test things related to dates or times. Where's that? And so let's just use an example and see how we can fix that problem. The example is we want to filter all items of a certain list that are in the future. So how do we do that? Well, we create a filter future items, filter, thingy, whatever, and then we pass an array to that, an iterable, and we just run some code on that. We just check whether the filter is valid. Fine. Everyone with me on that? Nodding, no one's shaking their head. Okay, that's fine. Cool. So and the solution for that is then, we create an actual filter, and in that filter we check whether the response from time is equals to what we kind of have in this time thingy item, which is an integer. Or if it's smaller than a certain time. Yeah, that's fine. Now we have other things that are in the future. Anyone spotting the problem with that? Sorry? Unit tests? Why? What do you mean? Sorry? Yeah, that's the thing. You have to hard code the time somehow, or it's going to break. Well, one of the things that I really like are pure functions, like things where you pass something in, and whatever you pass in, you get the same thing or the same information out. But if you 5 minutes later pass in the same things, you get the same information back out. As soon as we are using this odd time function here, that will never happen. Because, well, 5 minutes later is 5 minutes later, so we get something different. So instead of that, let's do something different. Slightly, but subtle. Instead of passing just the item, we also pass the current time into that. Is that unit testable? Yeah, sure. We can create a unit test for that. Awesome. So we create a constructor for that, pass the current time in there, and then we pass the time We check whether that is current time is the thing. Awesome. Anyone with me yet? Yeah? No one shaking heads? Perfect. And then we write a test for that. So we create our item list and with some information there, and then we just assert that everything is false except for the third one, because that's the future one. Works, doesn't it? Well, when I'm asking like that, most certainly it will not. Well, the cool thing is, it will work every now and then. But every now and then it will also not work. Because, yeah, perhaps we shouldn't call time 3 times up there. I mean, oh yeah, that's kind of, yeah, we go through that. Let's just use time once. So we create kind of a time and create that put that information in a variable, and then do the minus plus thingy there and check whether it works or not. That will work better. It will still fail every now and then because we are still kind of checking against the current time. So my personal most dreaded thing here actually is using the time function. In PHP, yes, if you are shaving microseconds, yes, that is your go-to, but then you should hopefully know what you're doing. Otherwise, I would advise you to use datetime immutable. We come to that in a second. Yeah, use datetime immutable, and then you can call the getTimestamp function if you actually want to have a timestamp. But the thing is, that's just immutable, and you can do a lot of other things with that information as well. The rest of the stuff kind of stays the same. It's still, we are still creating our 3 items. Oops. And we are then, yeah, the rest is the same. It's just the way we are initializing this that changes. How does that need to change in our function, in our class? Well, instead of passing the actual time in there, we are now passing this datetime object. And then now we call this current time getTimestamp. If that is smaller than the time we have in this item, then it's either valid or not. Great. So we have our filter future items filter that gets a datetime immutable, an instance of, and then, yeah, everything's fine, isn't it? Anyone spotting the problem? No? The list is very long. Yeah, that might be a thing. But that's only in the test, so I'm sure you don't need such a long list in the test. No, the thing is, who of you has been to Pim's talk this morning? We, apart from Pim himself, we have moved our external dependency, the time thingy, up 1 layer. But here we are still kind of instantiating an instance. So we need to put that up another layer if we want to test this class. And if you want to test this, if the next class, we need to put that up another layer and another layer. So we are kind of moving the actual instantiation, well, more or less indefinitely. How do we fix such an issue? How do we fix that? We at one point need to get something in code, but we currently don't know which one it is. Well, we use factories, don't we? You all with me on that? Yeah, cool. How could a factory for a datetime thingy look like? Well, let's build one. Let's create a current datetime factory. And this current datetime factory has a method called getCurrentDateTimeObject, which returns a datetime immutable object. That's it. It's a cool factory, isn't it? And it returns me the same, well, not the same thing. it returns me a datetime immutable object, hopefully not of the same datetime every time. And then my filter future item needs to be slightly tweaked, but only slightly. So instead of having injecting the actual datetime object, we are now injecting the factory. And in my implementation, in the valid function, we are not using the datetime object directly, but we are kind of calling the factory method to give us the current datetime. So at this point, we get the datetime whenever we call valid, and not like when we instantiated the object. Cool. So we create a new filter future items with our new current datetime factory and run the code. That's it. That's all that we need to change for that. Yeah, that's it. But the problem that we see here is, okay, now I'm coding to a concrete implementation. So when I'm using this one here, I'm actually, no, this one, sorry, I'm actually coding to a current datetime factory. And as we just learned, that's probably not the right thing to do. So instead of coding to a current datetime factory, let's create a datetime factory interface for that, which just references this getCurrentDatetime object method. Still with me? Yes? I see less nodding heads. Whom did I lose on the way? Okay, fine. So we're creating an interface for that. And if we create an interface, of course we need to implement that. So our current datetime factory implements, of course, the datetime factory interface. Cool. Great. So all that we need to change here is we are not expecting a datetime immutable datetime factory here. We are now expecting a datetime factory interface. Yes? Cool. And when we are creating our test, we are still kind of creating our datetime immutable here. But yeah, we can just here use the datetime interface factory for that. And that's what Katie just has shown. We can actually use in the test the possibility to extend the factory interface in an anonymous class. So we don't need to write any new code for the test. We just kind of use this one. We just kind of pretend that we are having something. But the cool thing is, in this case, I can create whatever, I can return as the current date whatever I want. I can just, I'm passing in a datetime immutable, and I'm just returning that. And whatever that datetime immutable is then up to me. I can suddenly inject a known date without needing to depend on actually a current date. I can inject here a date 3 years in the future or in the past. This still stays the same. This part of the test still is the same as before. Whom did I lose? Good. That's it. It works every time, thank you. But that is, in essence, a clock interface. We have just implemented a clock interface, including the test version of that. We just need to do some renaming. So this oddly named datetime factory interface, let's rename that to clock interface. And this odd current datetime factory, let's call that a system clock. And this anonymous class, let's call that a frozen clock, because we are kind of freezing the time to a certain thing. And this awesomely long-named getCurrentDatetime object function is just now. That's it. Now that we've seen that that is so easy, why do we use the fig? Who of you knows of the fig? Okay, so for those that don't know what the fig is, we're not talking about this nice little fruit that I'm highly allergic to, sorry. We're talking about the framework interoperability group. As a group of people, a group of frameworks that got together in, I don't know, pre-COVID, far pre-COVID, and they have thought about of ways to make things interoperable. We had a lot of different frameworks, a lot of different systems, and everyone, well, everyone thought pi is a thing, proudly invented, oh no, NI, not invented here, is a thing, so everything needs to be kind of invented itself, by themselves. And fig is pi, proudly invented elsewhere. We are just defining interfaces, we are defining standards, and whether you are using Symfony or Zend framework or Cake PHP or whatever else, we don't care. You can just use the different tools in the respective frameworks. And that was vital for things, for the current state of PHP actually. Short history on that is the first PSR in 2010, so it's actually been a while, was PSR 0 on autoloading. Without this PSR, without this interface that the fig defined, Composer wouldn't be possible. And without Composer, PHP would not be where they are currently. That was shortly after then replaced by PSR 4, which makes use of namespaces, which is cool. Another PSR you're probably all working with every day is PSR 3 for logging, and or PSR 6 for caching. And there is a whole list of that. That's my most favorable interface. I'm in a proud implementation of that. So if you want a hug later on, feel free to come. But how did I get involved in this whole thing? And that's not really complicated. There is a mailing list everyone can subscribe to. Yeah, as I said, on this mailing list, I was sitting in the hospital like 1 month in already, and then this email came in, and I didn't have anything else to do, so I was like, yes, awesome, this is about datetime, that's my thing. I have opinions on that, because that was the first initial proposal for the whole thing. So let's have a clock interface, and this clock interface should have 5 different methods. One is timestamp, which returns an int. One is immutable, which returns a datetime immutable. Datetime for a datetime object, and microtime for a float, and time zone for a date time zone. As I said, I have opinions. I'm not the only one that has opinions. I still remember Derek at one conference saying, yeah, datetime immutable is what datetime should have been in the first place. I'm very with him on that point. So that, for me, the first thing was, no, we are not gonna, if we are going to do that, we should not have that. Definitely not. We should only use datetime immutable. Also, the time zone is already part of the datetime immutable object. So why do we need a separate method for that? No reason in that, because we can just get the datetime immutable object and fetch the time zone from there. Similar, by the way, with the timestamp, we can get that as well. And a microtime as well, which, yeah, just leaves this immutable. Naming-wise, well, immutable is like, okay, that implies that something mutable would also be possible. No. Let's just call that now. Because at that time, there were already some implementations of clock interfaces. I think there were 4 or 5 implementations of such a clock interface that all provided their own interface and their own implementation of a system clock for that interface and their own implementation of a frozen clock for that interface. And all of those 5 implementations used now as the function. So using something different kind of didn't really make sense. And all of those, by the way, only use now and return a datetime immutable implementation. Yes, I think it took 2 days or something like that. So there was a working group actually forming around that. I was part of that working group. Some other people, some of the maintainers of these already existing clock interfaces or clock implementations were part of that working group. And some emails went back and forth, and I think it took 2 days or something like that. And we all agreed upon, yeah, that's the interface to go for. Everything else doesn't make any sense. Yeah. And then far too much time actually passed. I think it took 1.5 years to get from this, after 2 years we knew what it should be, to yes, it's finally released, due to different reasons. One of the reasons was that the sponsor and the leader of the working group, they both kind of ghosted. No one was able to get any information from them, and suddenly that was like, yeah, okay, we have a working group, but no one is actually leading them, and no one is kind of doing the next step to get that approved. And during that time, a lot of additional requests came in, like, yeah, but can't we also have sleep in that interface? No, because sleep has nothing to do with that. I can understand what where people were coming from, like, yes, but if I want to do a test and that test needs to test kind of something that happens now and then something that happens in 5 minutes, I would like to be able to have in the interface method to also fake the sleep. Yes, I can see that, but that is a separate interface and has nothing to do with getting a current date time. And also a lot of discussion was about time zones. Like, yeah, but we need to make sure that the datetime immutable object that is returned is in a certain time zone. No, we do not. Because, well, we can get this thing, if you get now, if you get the datetime object, you can set the time zone on that. The time zone that you expect your clock or your datetime object to be in. Because what does a time zone say? It just tells me where you are observing your time currently. Because each of these pictures is one slice of time. One slice of, this is now. And yes, at certain points on the globe, the clock shows you something different, but it is still the same time. There's a concept that a lot of people find difficult. I can understand that. Still, the time is always the same. Kind of the UTC point in time that we are talking about in one of these pictures is the same. But whether that is like, I don't know, like something like 10 in the evening in San Francisco and something like, I don't know, 5 o'clock in Berlin, that is just an implementation detail. And if my code relies upon whether it is 5 o'clock in the morning in Berlin or 10 in the evening in San Francisco, then I need to explicitly make sure that this information, this time zone information is set using, yes, I'm getting the time, and then I'm setting explicitly the time zone to do whatever, some formatting or whatnot. Are you with me on that? Wow, cool. I'm happy to discuss that later on if you have questions about that. Because the cool thing with the datetime immutable object is actually that I can compare two datetime objects, regardless their time zone, and check which one was earlier or later. So I can do something like this. I create a new datetime immutable when I created my slides in Europe, Berlin. And then I create a new datetime immutable object here in Amsterdam. And then I just compare them and just check, is this earlier than that? And it gives me true or false. And that's awesome, because it does the check not based on the hour, minute, second thingy, but based on the Unix timestamp, actually. It does the conversion internally. So having to know the time zone of a datetime object, for me, always is a code smell. If I have to know what time zone something is in, then something fishy is going on. Or you know exactly what you do. Most of the time, you don't. So having that said, I can set my system clock to, and that's the cool thing. I can set my system clock, I can initialize my system clock with a date time zone. Depending on the implementation that I'm using, most of the system clock implementations of libraries out there allow you to initialize the system clock with actually a certain date time zone. So you can rely upon whenever I'm calling now, I get something back in a certain time zone. But that is implicit, it is not explicit. And no one is hindering you from setting UTC as time zone, because, yeah, why not? But if you rely upon that, and you don't set it explicitly when fetching the datetime, then you might get the wrong thing. Might. Yeah, and that's what you do. You inject the clock interface into your method, into your class, in the constructor, and whenever you need to do something with now, with the datetime information, you just call the clock. Give me now. What's the time? So that's the interface. That's what it looks like. And luckily, very luckily, the interface in the PSR got released, I think 2 years ago. It was shortly before Symfony 6, I think, was released. I think the release was in November, and the interface was actually finalized mid of October, and the next Symfony release actually got a clock implementation. If you're using that clock implementation, or if you're using Symfony and do some testing, make sure that you are actually injecting your frozen clock, because I had some issues with that and stumbled upon that and was like, why does that not work? Yeah, because I injected the wrong or had the wrong naming, and suddenly I got Symfony's internal system clock, and yeah, things broke. But yeah, still, that was an awesome thing. So it's available in Symfony, therefore it's also available in Laravel. I think Zen Framework is using it by now. There are at least 5 implementations of different clock, 5 clock implementations from different providers that are completely interchangeable, usable, because they are all implementing this interface. So whenever you just say, yeah, I want a clock interface, you can choose which one to use. And that's the cool thing, because you don't have to code it yourself. It's not complicated. We've seen that. But now you can use something that someone else already has thought about and has made. And the great thing is, in your code, when everyone just requires the interface, you only have one clock implementation. Previously, it was like, oh yeah, I need this library. Yeah, that's kind of using this clock implementation. And I need this library. Oh yeah, this is also requiring a clock implementation, but from someone else. So you had kind of 5 different clock implementations in your code base. Yeah, which means now you only have one implementation, which is 4 kind of dependencies less, which is good. Any questions? We can chat now, because I think I'm not that.
There's plenty of time, 10 minutes.
Yeah, so still some time. Any questions? None? Oh.
Yeah, I was still wondering from the first part of your talk, how do we test the datetime factory or the clock? Because we have extracted it all out of the rest of the code base, but how do we test the clock itself?
That's the cool thing. You don't need to, because you use someone else's implementation and they take care of that.
How do they test it?
It's not your problem.
Okay.
No, the thing is, of course, in the case that you want to actually test the implementation, you have to use, well, there are 2 parts of the implementation. One is an implementation that returns the current datetime immutable object. So it actually has to return something that is almost the same time as you are now. So you return that and compare it with a new datetime immutable object that you just created, and set the correct time zone and compare the timestamp, which is always the UTC timestamp of them two, and allow for a second or two to difference, kind of. That would be the most appropriate way, probably.
Yeah, you can test with the delta or something, right?
Yeah, something
they
like
have some.
Yeah. So that
Right.
that you can actually have some difference in between, but it's like negligible.
But I guess the main benefit is that you don't have to do it yourself anymore because you can use the other implementation.
That's the thing. You don't have to do it. Someone else thought about that. If you want to check how they did it, look at their tests.
Fine, thanks.
Anyone else? Then thank you very much. And I will put up the slides, or the slides are already online, not in the dark theme, but in the light theme. And they also include a shitload of links that you perhaps might want to check out for whatever. And I've also heard that the talks are all on joined in, so feel free to leave me a feedback there on what was good, what can be improved. That would be really, really helpful for me. Thank you very much.